Right, we'll move on to the first main item on the agenda, number 4, which is the report around complaints and conduct, and the key information is set out regarding the performance and the service recovery teams that are in place to deal with this. And obviously through this office we have been involved in conversations with yourself, Dee, and the Professional Standards Department, looking at some potential changes in the future in line with the legislation. But I'll hand over to you at this point.
So, Commissioner, I was reflecting last night as we were preparing for this meeting today about where perhaps we were 4 years ago when I first arrived in West Yorkshire. And if you recall, you had just commissioned the Crawford report. We were finding ourselves with excessive numbers of complaints as a force, particularly of the more severe kind. We were having far greater numbers of officers and staff suspended and going through formal misconduct processes. So I actually see that the progress that we've made over the last 4 years is really significant. And I say that because HMIC have given us that feedback when they've come and inspected us. In the recent annual report from the IOPC, they have noted that actually we've made significant progress in terms of early resolution. So I'm going to introduce Simon to actually go through the report, but I do think that there's a lot of good news about the way the department runs, the speediness of which we are now dealing with complaints, the severity assessments that we are making in terms of what we then do, and actually ensuring that the complainants are informed as to what's going on. I accept that we don't always get that right, but we have made massive strides forward in comparison to where we were. Simon.
Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Commissioner. I'll pick out some of the good news stories within the report. Basically, total yearly figures on complaints have seen a reduction of 22%, with allegations decreasing at 18%. So that's a real good news story for us. And that, in essence, is down to the introduction of the service recovery team, where we can deal with those complaints at the front end, which is what the public want us to do. We are working hard with districts and departments to inform colleagues that the best way to not attract a complaint is 3 key areas which actually attract 62% of all complaints, and those are the neglect of failure in duty, which is linked to not providing updates, which we're working hard to resolve, incivility, and then the other one is other assault, which is linked to low-level assaults during the arrest and custody phase. So them are the 3 key messages we keep pushing out to people to try and bring complaints down even further. The service recovery team, as I say, has been a massive success. They're now resolving 61% of all complaints through local resolution, which is the lowest form available. We have seen the makeup of the service recovery team now with the introduction of police staff as complaints officer, and it's a 50-50 split across the team. And the Chief touched on the IOPC data, which I take great pride in, because when we look at the performance framework and how we compare with our more similar forces, we are right up there. By way of example, we are the best in the country around local resolutions, 22 days to resolve a complaint through local resolution, which I think is fantastic. Touched on legislation changes, but at the moment West Yorkshire Police remain the appeal body for local resolution, and that is running at 18%. I won't go into great detail around that, but it's a figure we want to try and get down for obvious reasons. Likewise, an area for development is the appeal rate upheld by the IOPC, which is currently running at 45%, and we have met with the team over at Sale and we have an action plan in place. More data around referrals. We're seeing an increase in referrals in the last 12 months, and as a result of that, the IOPC has promised to taking on more independent investigations, and currently we have 30 live independent investigations and 2 supervised. We are working closely with CARDA members just to reinforce the referral criteria around death and serious injuries. And as I said, there's some CARDA input days which the IOPC are joining us with just to raise that awareness. Conduct cases is interesting. Conduct cases are on the rise, significant rise, in as much as 62%, and the main areas are linked to off-duty behaviour, and duties and responsibilities. Now, some of those duties and responsibilities have fallen out of IOPC investigations where we have referred a DSI matter and they are identifying conduct matters within that. And again, we've got an action plan in place to address that. There's been 4 independent cases recently that the IOPC have led on, with the outcomes being one officer received management advice, another case wasn't proven, one officer received a final written warning, and one officer was dismissed for abuse of position. Again, the suspended and restricted position looks really good in that we've only got 9 police officers suspended and 6 police staff and 21 officers unrestricted, which is probably the lowest it's been for quite a while.
And that's clearly linked to the severity of the allegation, the type of gross misconduct. We've had conversations previously about trying our best to retain people in the workplace rather than suspending them as best we can. But of course it depends on the nature of the duties and the nature of the allegations.
The police staff discipline policy, which PSD lead on, has had some significant changes through the last GNCC, and one of the big changes will see the ability of the organisation to, where appropriate, put police staff on the advisory and barred list, which is drawing parity with police officers. And I think again we're one of the first in the country to actually change our local policy to meet with the legislation. Other areas where we're working hard to support colleagues during difficult times is the introduction of the Training and Welfare Support Scheme. That initiative works with colleagues out of districts that we know when officers and staff are served with misconduct notices, it can be a very difficult time. So there is that professional report. Colleagues are trained with Mind, which is a company who offer that peer support. So that's gone down really well with those who are subject to investigation. We are acutely aware that HMIC will be looking to see what our response has been to the national strategy around abuse of position, and I am very confident that our local strategy meets all the expectations within the national strategy, and that led to a conference which took place at Training School in July that the Deputy Chief Constable opened, and that was all about raising awareness with partner agencies who deal with vulnerable groups, so we could open some reporting streams for those that may be abused by the very few colleagues in the organisation, and that was well received as well. To continue to push the policies within PSD, we try to keep it innovative as opposed to just put it on the internet, please read these policies. So we've introduced 60-second animation clips which looks at business interests, notifiable associations, drugs and alcohol, computer misuse and abusive position. We appreciate everybody's busy, and it's just a 60-second reminder just to make sure everybody knows the standards expected. We're linking in with bite-sized symposiums, the Professional Development Network and the Chain Champions, just to try and change the culture of it's not sanction and punishment, it's about education and learning and support wherever possible. Intervention Support Programme is a new programme that's seen new data sets being introduced to try and identify those officers and staff who may be heading towards a misconduct process, and there's always those early triggers that we can work with districts and local supervisors to put arm around colleagues and try and prevent them going down the misconduct route. So that is at the district department head level, and we brief out officers of concern, and again that's gone down really well with the Federation and the unions because it's all about prevention. And then are really the headlines. As I say, it feels like we're moving in the right direction, and it's in a good place.
Yeah, no, thank you. I agree that in terms of where we were 4 years ago compared to now, and the change of emphasis around that early local resolution where it's appropriate has made a big difference. So I think well done really to everybody concerned in achieving that. And as you say, we kicked off some of that through the Crawford Review back then, so pleased that that has had an impact in the way that now things are done. Can I just touch on the IOPC aspect, because clearly, and you did mention the figures around the difference really in the IOPC, Independent Office of Police Public Complaints, numbers in terms of upholding appeals compared to what the force has done. Can you give any more information about the processes that will be put in place following your discussion with the IOPC in July, and what are those likely to mean in terms of experience of the complainant, for example, and some of that, I think page 2 talks about appeals against the outcome of local resolutions as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Commissioner. Well, the expected outcomes for the public will hopefully be less appeals, swifter finalisations and better explanations as to what's being investigated. It might be interesting to know what the grounds for appeal are, because it's about when an investigation's been completed, they can appeal on not being informed of the findings, the action taken in relation to each allegation, and this is where we get into what's called a proportionate investigation, which I'll come on to. Whether there's a case to answer or not, what action is going to be taken in respect of the officer or staff member, and whether the matter was referred to the CPS. So, just in context around volumes, there were 460 cases where the IOPC were the appeal body. 103 of those appealed, of which 46 were upheld. So we did go over to the review team's office at Sale in Manchester and sat down with the team, and it was really, really enlightening as to the different understanding of what they felt a proportionate investigation would look like as opposed to what we feel it looks like. But the main issues that came out of it are when an appeal is made, the process was that PSD was sending the papers straight to the IOPC without letting the investigator know what the appeal points were. Now we're allowing the investigator to put some context to those appeal points, which I think will really assist the IOPC in their review. The second and interesting point was when the complaint first comes into PSD, and by way of example, if it is a 10-page letter, the complaint officer will try and make sense of that and break it down into, let's say, 10 allegations, and then get the complainant to agree them are the 10 points that want investigated. However, what the IOPC will say is they take no cognizance of that. They will always refer back to the original 10-page letter. And if there are any allegations that have been missed, they will uphold the complaint. So that was a real learning point for us. And then just simple things like the use of language. So where they were asking for us to go take a statement, we were assuming that was a Section 9 statement. And they were saying, no, it's just an account from somebody. So all these little things, it was a really valuable exercise. And to say, no, the force has done it. And as a result of that, we're now going down to see the referrals team in Birmingham, because I'm sure that some key learning comes out for us all there. So really good exercise, and I am confident that appeal rate will go down.
Okay, well, thanks for that. So what you've sort of described there then is some of it is more around the procedural
Absolutely, yes.
interpretation.
Yeah, and interpretation,
yes.
and I think sometimes if you haven't had the opportunity, and we hadn't for some time to be fair, to actually sit down and talk this through, what do you mean, what do you mean?
Yes.
And guess what, we were talking at slightly cross purposes. And in fairness to the complainant, it's only right then that the IOPC upheld the appeal, because between us, we hadn't fully understood what the issues were. I think now, having sat down and got that meeting, and that better shared understanding, and the ability also for the investigating officer to have the opportunity to better understand what the questions are and be able to provide that context, I think actually the complainants and the appellants will get a better service. And besides which, the learning points that then come out of that, we can then feed into the next series of processes. So I actually see what we've started here is a really good learning mechanism, perfectly fair, perfectly balanced, and absolutely right and proper that we each understand one another's position, but also important that whoever is making the appeals better understands why the outcome is as it is.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. And obviously it's about closing the gap rather than necessarily achieving 100% compliance, because clearly the fact that the IOPC are an appeals body,
Yes.
Things will quite rightly end up there sometimes. But yeah, pleased to hear about the learning and the improvements that will be made on the back of that. Can you also just explain briefly what the force is doing to address other learning points identified by the AOPC in terms of the grading of reports of missing persons by control room staff, which is referred to on page 4 under the conduct cases?
Yeah, so as I alluded to, there has been this rise in conduct matters being returned by the IOPC under duties and responsibilities for their perceived failures in the way we have been dealing with missing persons and vulnerable people, and very much so control room staff who are the front end recipients of threat, risk and harm, and hub commanders. It's interesting to note that in all IOPC independent investigations, within the terms of reference, they will always stipulate whether West Yorkshire Police has complied with policy and procedure in relation to the critical incident, whether they've followed APP guidance, NPCC guidance or force policy. And I think that's where the rub might be, because in a busy hub, hundreds of calls, you know, is it practical always to get the policy out and have a... So what we've tried to do is assist our colleagues working with the IOPC. We have created guidance/aid memoirs which will give them confidence to actually write policy on command and control logs that will be open and transparent and will show the thought processes at that time, as opposed to being quite critical in the cold light of day 48 hours later. So that's gone down really well with both the IOPC. They've approved it for its use and circulation, and I'm hoping that this will not only safeguard vulnerable people but protect our colleagues making difficult decisions.
I think one of the key areas here is when you speak to the IOPC, they will flag up that West Yorkshire is an area that seems to have far more high risk missing people per population than anywhere else in the country.
Yeah.
That then suggests that perhaps we also need to look at our risk assessment process and make sure that we're actually getting that right. Because clearly, if we are unfortunately getting that wrong and perhaps grading some people as high risk when perhaps they're not, clearly then we are expected to still follow the policy, because that's what our policy tells us. So we're also doing some work with the IOPC to try and understand, is our risk assessment where it needs to be? Because we do stand out in comparison to everybody else in the country. Actually, if you think about it, that's because we want to try and make sure that we do the very best we can for missing people. But the counter to that is we're then seeing some conduct issues being flagged up in an area where perhaps actually we've been doing the right thing as best we can based on what we think we've got as opposed to what we've assessed it as, if that makes any sense. So I just think there's some further work that we can do here, but it also depends, again, on that risk assessment process, which is pretty much then steering what people then do or don't do.
Yeah. So, a few things could fall out of that deal then in terms of the demand profile, etc., and other things that we've discussed previously and at the last panel meeting actually regarding the debate we had around the amount of time that the force are spending on missing persons inquiries. So, so it would be good if other learning could come out of that as well. Yeah. Anything, Jane?
Simon, can I just ask about the timeliness of investigations?
Yes.
Because it's really welcome to read in the report that there's the welfare support programme that you've introduced, and that will be really beneficial. You're also clear that one of the issues for officers is the amount of time that these investigations take and the strain that has on officers and staff. So what do you think the prospects are for collapsing that investigative time frame compared to what it currently sits at?
Well, we would always look to be as swift and efficient as possible, and as we know, it is a very bureaucratic process with various elements, and sometimes the process is slow to turn around. But what we have introduced is a performance framework that sits outside anything the IOPC actually measures us on. And that looks at each role within the process and puts some timescales on it, and we have seen a reduction. I cut the figures out, unfortunately, but we have seen a reduction in I mean, there's 4 types of investigation. There's the local resolution, which is 21 days. There's those that are not subject to requirements, and that's running at around 50 days. You've got misconduct investigations running at something like 70 days.
Yeah.
And gross misconduct's about 75.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's something that we are really keen on, because
Yeah.
it fell out of the staff survey last time around timeliness. So we do work hard to try and minimise the times.
But there's a couple of factors here that are really important, and I think it's important that the public understand this.
Yeah.
So it depends on the number of witnesses that we have to see. It depends sometimes on the type of evidence that we need to retrieve, and of course some of that can be quite difficult and complicated. It depends on the availability of the individual officers and perhaps their legal representatives and federation representatives as to the timeliness about when we can actually conduct interviews. And then finally, sadly, sometimes in some cases, the officers or staff themselves may be quite poorly.
Yes.
And for obvious reasons, their welfare is also an important factor here. And it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to be able to conduct an interview if somebody was genuinely really ill. And that can also add to the timeliness issue. We're aware of that, and of course we're working together with everybody to try and get those times down.
Okay. No, thank you. I think we've covered the main issues we wanted to raise out of that. So thanks again for giving us the update on that report.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.